I said step back! Now!
Ma'am, step away from the counter. Hands where I can see them. Excuse me? I work here. Yeah, sure you do. Turn around. I'm not turning around. My name is on this building. Lady, I don't care whose name is on the building. You're making a scene. Turn around or I'll do it for you. Then you better be ready to explain this to your chief, because I'm Vanessa Caldwell, and you just ended your career. On a Tuesday morning in late September, inside the marble lobby of Prestige National Bank in downtown Charlotte, North Carolina, Officer Kevin Bryce made a decision that would cost the city $14 million, destroy his own career, and expose a pattern of bias so deep that 3 additional officers would lose their badges before the investigation was finished. Officer Bryce, 31 years old and 4 years into a beat assignment that covered the financial district, had responded to a silent alarm triggered inside the bank at 9:07 a.m. The alarm was a false activation caused by a system malfunction during a routine software update that the bank's security team had already identified and was in the process of resetting. But Bryce didn't know that when he walked through the front doors and what he did in the next 6 minutes would be captured in full by 4 separate security cameras, 2 employee phones, and his own body camera. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit subscribe. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Prestige. National Bank occupied the ground floor and mezzanine of the Caldwell Financial Tower, a 28-story glass and steel structure that had become one of Charlotte's most recognizable landmarks since its completion in 2019. The building sat at the intersection of Tryon and 4th, anchoring the west end of the financial district with the kind of quiet authority that comes from architecture designed to project permanence. The bank itself was not a branch. It was the corporate headquarters, housing executive offices on the upper floors, wealth management divisions on floors 8 through 14, and the flagship banking hall on the ground level, a space with 30-foot ceilings, Italian marble floors, and teller stations built from the hand-finished walnut. The building bore one name above its entrance, etched into a granite panel in letters 2 feet tall: Caldwell. Vanessa Caldwell was 47 years old. She'd grown up in the West End neighborhood of Charlotte, the daughter of a postal worker and a school librarian, in a house where education was treated as the only currency that never depreciated. She'd graduated valedictorian from West Charlotte High School, earned her undergraduate degree in economics from Spelman College, and completed her MBA at Wharton. She spent her 20s at Goldman Sachs, where she rose faster than most of her peers and was told more than once, in language that was never quite direct enough to report, that her success was surprising for someone with her background. She left Goldman at 32 to co-found what would become Prestige National Bank, starting with $4 million in seed capital, a converted office space in Noda, and a vision for a financial institution that would serve communities that traditional banks had spent decades ignoring. 15 years later, Prestige National managed $9.2 billion in assets, operated 41 branches across 6 states, employed over 3,800 people, and had been named by Forbes as one of the fastest-growing regional banks in the country for 3 consecutive years. Vanessa Caldwell was its founder, majority shareholder, and chief executive officer. Her photograph hung in the lobby of the building that carried her family name. Her signature appeared on every major account document the bank issued. She was, by any measure, one of the most accomplished business leaders in the state of North Carolina. On this particular Tuesday morning, she had arrived at the bank at 8:45 a.m., earlier than usual, because she had a 10 a.m. call with the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond regarding a proposed expansion into Virginia's underserved markets. She was dressed in a cream-colored blazer, black slacks, and simple gold jewelry, her standard workday attire. She'd come in through the executive entrance on the building's east side, stopped by her office on the 22nd floor to collect a file, and then taken the elevator down to the banking hall to speak with her head of retail operations about a staffing issue that had come up the previous afternoon. She was standing at the main counter, reviewing a printout with her retail director, when Officer Kevin Bryce walked through the front doors. Bryce had been on the force for 4 years. His performance reviews were unremarkable, not bad enough to flag, and not good enough to promote. He had 2 prior complaints in his file, both from black residents in the financial district who had reported being stopped without cause. Both complaints had been reviewed internally and closed without action. The department citing insufficient evidence in language that had become familiar to anyone who had ever tried to hold an officer accountable for conduct that left no bruises and generated no arrest reports. When Bryce entered the banking hall responding to the silent alarm, he scanned the room the way officers are trained to do when entering a potential active situation. Tellers behind the counter. A security guard near the entrance who was already waving him over to explain the false alarm. 3 customers seated in the waiting area, and a black woman standing at the main counter, leaning over paperwork, talking to a man in a suit. The security guard, a retired police officer named Thomas Whitfield, who had worked building security for 6 years, reached Bryce within seconds of his entry. He spoke clearly and directly. "Officer, we have a false alarm. The system triggered during a software update. Our security team has already confirmed it. We're in the process of resetting now. There is no emergency." Bryce looked at Whitfield. He nodded, and then he looked past him, back at the woman at the counter. What happened next was captured from multiple angles, and every single one of them showed the same thing. Bryce walked past Whitfield, past the security desk, past the teller stations, and directly toward Vanessa Caldwell. He did not approach the tellers. He did not speak to the branch manager, whose office was clearly visible through a glass partition 10 feet to his left. He did not radio dispatch to confirm the alarm status. He walked straight to the only black person in the room, who was not behind a counter or in uniform, and treated her as the threat. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the counter." Vanessa looked up from her paperwork. Her expression shifted from concentration to confusion. "Excuse me? Step away from the counter. Now, hands where I can see them." The retail director standing next to Vanessa, a white man named David Park, looked at Bryce with visible confusion. "Officer, this is—" Bryce cut him off without looking at him. "Sir, I need you to step back. I'm handling this." Vanessa's voice was controlled but firm. "Officer, I work here. I'm the CEO of this bank." Bryce's response was immediate. The body camera captured it with perfect clarity. The dismissive half laugh, the slight shake of the head, the tone of practiced disbelief that told everyone watching exactly what assumptions were driving his actions. "Ma'am, I've heard that one before. I need you to step away from the counter and produce identification. Right now." Thomas Whitfield had followed Bryce across the lobby and was now standing 3 feet behind him. "Officer, I already told you." The alarm was false, and this woman is Vanessa Caldwell. She owns this bank. She owns this building. Bryce didn't turn around. He kept his eyes fixed on Vanessa, his hand resting on the cuffs at his belt. "Sir, I need everyone to give me space to do my job. If this happened to you, what would your reaction be? Let me know in the comments." Vanessa set her pen down on the counter. She straightened her posture and looked directly at Bryce with an expression that was not anger and was not fear. It was the particular kind of composure that comes from a woman who has spent 25 years in boardrooms where people underestimated her and learned, eventually, that the underestimation was always their problem and never hers. "Officer, my name is Vanessa Caldwell. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Prestige National Bank. My photograph is hanging on the wall 12 feet to your right. My name is engraved on the building you walked into. I have been informed by my security director that the alarm was a false activation, which he has already communicated to you. I am not going to step away from my own counter in my own bank. What Bryce did next turned a bad situation into a catastrophic one. He reached for her arm. The body camera showed it clearly. His left hand extending toward her right wrist, fingers closing around her forearm, the beginning of a physical detention of a woman who had committed no crime in a building she owned, after being told by 2 separate people that there was no emergency. Vanessa pulled her arm back. "Don't touch me." And then Bryce said the words that would be played on every news broadcast in the country within 48 hours. "Ma'am, you can either cooperate or I can put you in cuffs. Your choice, but you are not walking away from this counter until I say so." He unclipped his handcuffs. The banking hall had gone completely silent. Tellers had stopped mid-transaction. Customers in the waiting area had turned in their seats. David Park stood frozen beside the counter, his mouth slightly open, watching something unfold that he couldn't quite process. Thomas Whitfield had pulled out his phone and was recording. His retired officer's instinct telling him that documentation was the most important thing he could provide in that moment. Bryce took Vanessa's wrist, turned her around, and placed handcuffs on the CEO of the bank in the lobby of the building that bore her name in front of her own employees, while 4 security cameras captured every second from 4 different angles. He was reaching for his radio to call for transport when the elevator doors opened. Marcus Webb, Prestige National's chief operating officer, stepped into the lobby. He had been on the 22nd floor when David Park's assistant had called up, in a voice that was trying very hard to stay professional while describing something that sounded impossible. Marcus took 3 steps out of the elevator, saw Vanessa in handcuffs, and stopped. He was a former federal prosecutor. He understood immediately what he was looking at and exactly what it meant. He crossed the lobby with a stride that was fast but controlled, reached into his jacket, and produced his own identification along with a business card. "Officer, my name is Marcus Webb. I am the chief operating officer of this bank. The woman you have just handcuffed is Vanessa Caldwell, the founder and CEO of Prestige National Bank, and the owner of this building. You have been told this by our security director, by our retail operations director, and by Ms. Caldwell herself. You are currently detaining the chief executive of a $9 billion financial institution in our own headquarters. I need you to remove those handcuffs immediately." Bryce looked at Marcus. He looked at the identification. He looked at Vanessa, who stood with her hands cuffed behind her back, her jaw set, her eyes burning with a fury that she was containing through sheer force of will. He looked at the growing crowd of bank employees who had gathered, some of them recording, all of them watching their CEO in handcuffs. And somewhere in the back of his mind, the catastrophic reality of what he had done began to crystallize. But he didn't remove the handcuffs. Not immediately. He stood there for a long, terrible moment, his hand still on the radio, trapped between the recognition that he had made a devastating error and the inability to admit it. It was Thomas Whitfield who finally broke the silence. "Officer, I served 22 years on the force. I'm telling you right now, if you don't take those cuffs off in the next 10 seconds, what happens to your career after today won't be something you recover from." Bryce removed the handcuffs. His hands were shaking as he did it. The body camera captured that too. The fumbling with the key, the way he couldn't quite meet Vanessa's eyes, the way his jaw worked like he was trying to form words that wouldn't come. The cuffs came off at 9:13 a.m. The entire encounter had lasted 6 minutes. 6 minutes that would cost the city $14 million. Do you think the officer should have been arrested on the spot? Yes or no? Tell me in the comments. Vanessa rubbed her wrists where the cuffs had been. She looked at Bryce with an expression that contained no gratitude for their removal and no relief. Only the cold clarity of a woman who understood exactly what had just happened and exactly what she was going to do about it. "I want your name, your badge number, your supervisor's name, and the incident number for this encounter, and I want them now." Bryce recited the information in a voice that had lost everything it had carried 6 minutes earlier. The authority, the certainty, the dismissive confidence that had allowed him to walk past a security guard's explanation, past a retail director's identification, past the name on the building itself, and handcuff a woman whose only offense was being black in a space that his assumptions told him she didn't belong in. Marcus was already on the phone with the bank's legal counsel. David Park was escorting employees back to their stations, his face pale. Thomas Whitfield was saving his video footage to 3 separate cloud accounts because 22 years on the force had taught him that evidence had a way of becoming unavailable when it was most needed. Vanessa walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the 22nd floor, and disappeared behind the closing doors. She did not speak to Bryce again. She did not need to. Everything that needed to be said would be said by attorneys, by investigators, by the footage that was already being preserved, and by the lawsuit that would be filed before the week was out. The body camera footage was released by the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department 72 hours after the incident, following a formal request from the bank's legal team and significant media pressure. It was viewed 6 million times in the first 48 hours. The comment sections across every platform carried the same message in 10,000 different voices. He walked past the security guard, who told him it was a false alarm. He walked past the branch manager. He walked past the name on the building. And he went straight to the only black person who wasn't behind a counter. That's not a mistake. That's a confession. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department placed Bryce on administrative leave within 24 hours. A full internal affairs investigation was launched by day 3. The investigation uncovered what Vanessa's legal team had already begun to document. Bryce's 2 prior complaints, both from black professionals in the financial district, both dismissed with identical language. A pattern of stops that disproportionately targeted black individuals in an area where the majority of pedestrians were white, and a training record that showed Bryce had scored in the bottom 15% of his academy class on bias recognition modules and had never been required to complete supplemental training. Bryce was terminated on day 19. His termination letter cited failure to follow established protocols for alarm response, unauthorized physical detention of a civilian without probable cause, disregard for information provided by on-site security personnel, and conduct unbecoming of an officer. The union filed a grievance. The grievance was denied. But the investigation didn't stop with Bryce. The 2 prior complaints that had been dismissed were reopened and examined by an independent review board. The board found that the supervising sergeant who had closed both complaints, a 16-year veteran named Lieutenant James Farley, had used identical dismissal language in 23 separate complaints over a 4-year period, all involving officers accused of racially biased conduct. Farley was placed on administrative leave pending further review. 2 additional officers, whose complaints Farley had buried, were also flagged for pattern of conduct reviews. One resigned before the review was completed. The other was terminated. 4 badges gone. 1 lieutenant suspended. An entire precinct's complaint review process exposed as a system designed to protect officers rather than serve the public. Should the department be investigated by the federal government? Drop your thoughts below. Vanessa Caldwell filed a comprehensive federal civil rights lawsuit 5 weeks after the incident. The complaint named Officer Kevin Bryce individually, Lieutenant James Farley as supervising officer, and the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department as an institution. The legal claims were extensive. 4th Amendment violation for unlawful seizure and detention without probable cause. 14th Amendment violation for racial discrimination, supported by statistical evidence of Bryce's disproportionate targeting of black individuals. Violation of civil rights under color of law for using his authority to detain Vanessa based on racial bias rather than evidence. Intentional infliction of emotional distress for the humiliation of being handcuffed in front of employees and customers in her own place of business. Interference with commercial operations for disrupting the bank's business during operating hours. Municipal liability for the department's systemic failure to properly investigate complaints and its pattern of clearing officers with documented bias issues for continued duty. The lawsuit sought $20 million in damages and comprehensive reforms to the department's complaint review process. The discovery phase produced evidence that made the city's legal position untenable. Internal emails showed that Farley had been told by a colleague to actually read the complaints instead of rubber-stamping dismissals, and had responded that the officers in question were doing their jobs and that the complaints were coming from people who don't understand how policing works. The email was dated 14 months before the incident with Vanessa. The $14 million settlement was announced at a press conference 11 months after the encounter in the banking hall. Vanessa stood at a podium in the lobby of the Caldwell Financial Tower, in the same space where she had been handcuffed, wearing the same composure she had carried through every moment of this ordeal. "This settlement is not a victory," she began. A victory would have been an officer who responded to a false alarm, was told by building security that the situation was resolved, and left. That would have taken 90 seconds. Instead, what happened in this lobby took 6 minutes and cost this city $14 million because one officer looked at me and decided, based on nothing but the color of my skin, that I was a threat in my own building. She paused and looked directly at the cameras. "I have resources. I have attorneys. I have a building with 4 security cameras and employees who are willing to speak up. Most people who experience what I experienced don't have any of those things. They get handcuffed, and they don't have a COO stepping off an elevator with a business card. They get detained, and there's no security footage to contradict the officer's report. They file complaints, and those complaints end up on Lieutenant Farley's desk, where they disappear into a drawer with 22 others. The only reason my case is different is because of who I am, and that is exactly the problem. Justice should not depend on your title. Vanessa donated $3 million of the settlement to establish the Caldwell Foundation for Equitable Policing, a nonprofit dedicated to independent oversight of law enforcement complaint processes in North Carolina. She returned to her role as CEO of Prestige National Bank, though she later said in an interview that something shifted permanently on that Tuesday morning. "You don't forget what it feels like to be handcuffed in your own lobby," she said. "You don't forget the sound of your employees going quiet. You don't forget the way an officer looks at you when he has already decided who you are before you open your mouth. I built a $9 billion bank from nothing. I put my name on a building. And none of that mattered in the moment. A man with a badge decided I didn't belong there. That's what people need to understand about this kind of bias. It doesn't care about your resume. It doesn't care about your net worth. It sees one thing, and it acts on that one thing, and everything else becomes invisible." Officer Kevin Bryce's law enforcement career lasted 4 years. The body camera footage of him handcuffing a bank CEO in her own lobby would follow him permanently, viewed over 14 million times across platforms, studied in police academies, cited in civil rights training programs, and referenced in 3 separate federal oversight reports on policing practices in the Southeast. He attempted to appeal his termination through a civil service hearing. The hearing lasted less than 2 hours. The body camera footage was played in full. The hearing officer asked Bryce a single question that defined the entire proceeding. "Officer Bryce, you were told by building security that the alarm was false. You were told by a bank employee that the woman was the CEO. You were standing beneath a sign bearing her name. You were 12 feet from her photograph on the wall. At what point did you consider that the information being given to you might be accurate?" Bryce could not answer. His attorney requested a recess. When they returned, the appeal was withdrawn. He moved out of state within 4 months. His prospects in law enforcement, or in any field requiring public trust, effectively ended the moment those handcuffs clicked shut on a woman who had built everything around her from the ground up and was told, in the space she created, that she didn't belong. Lieutenant James Farley never returned to active duty. His administrative leave was converted to a forced early retirement after the Independent Review Board found that his systematic dismissal of complaints had created what they called an environment of institutional permission for biased conduct. His pension was reduced. His name appeared in the federal oversight report, alongside a recommendation that complaint review processes across the state be removed from the chain of command of the officers being investigated. Thomas Whitfield, the retired officer turned security director who had recorded the encounter and attempted to intervene, was invited to testify before the state legislature's Committee on Police Oversight Reform. His testimony, delivered with the quiet authority of a man who had spent 22 years wearing a badge and understood exactly what it meant when that badge was misused, was cited in the final text of the North Carolina Police Accountability Act, passed 14 months after the incident in the banking hall. The Caldwell Financial Tower still stands at Tryon and 4th. The banking hall still operates every weekday, serving customers, managing accounts, conducting the daily business of an institution that employs thousands of people. The security cameras still record. The name above the entrance hasn't changed. But if you walk into that lobby today, you'll notice something that wasn't there before. A small plaque near the main counter, installed at Vanessa's request, carrying a single line. Dignity is not negotiable. If you believe these stories matter, if you think officers who handcuff citizens based on assumptions rather than evidence should face immediate consequences, hit that subscribe button. We're exposing how unchecked bias and broken complaint systems create multi-million-dollar disasters. We're demanding accountability, not just for the officers who act on prejudice, but for the supervisors who protect them. And we're fighting for a world where a woman can stand in her own building, at her own counter, doing her own work, without being treated like a criminal because of the color of her skin. This isn't about one officer or one bank. It's about every person who has been made to feel like an intruder in a space they built with their own hands.